Today I'm going to show you how I turned this $500 Jeep that was destined for the crusher into this amazing daily driver while also maintaining a pretty tight budget. In this video I'll be showing you how I affordably brought new life into this Jeep's interior, sourced larger parts such as this $300 replacement transmission, minor collision repair panels, and last but not least, how I painted this Jeep for less than $100 using Rust-Oleum and a paint roller on the side of the road. All of these tips and tricks can be used for any budget build or project car. As part of this video, I'm going to do my best to provide as many links as possible to everything I used, as well as the pricing. So let's dive into it. Hey, and welcome to my channel, Old School Overdrive. Today we're going to cover this build from start to finish, so let's start with how I sourced this vehicle for $500. Now obviously if I'm getting a vehicle this cheap, that means it probably needs some repairs, and you're right. There were some minor things that the previous owner had told me it needed done, the main one being that the air conditioning unit had failed and he wasn't sure what it was going to take to fix it. Now down here in Texas, that is a pretty big deal breaker for most people, and it's a pretty large gamble. It can cost thousands of dollars to repair an AC unit, especially if you don't know what's wrong with it. Now the other reason I got this vehicle so cheap is my coworker had just had a baby with his wife, and they decided it was not worth the gamble to try to fix the air conditioning unit, so they decided to just cut their losses and get rid of it. Now if you've ever tried to sell a vehicle at a good price that needs repairs, you can get some sketchy people that show up. So with a newborn in the house, especially at the peak of COVID, they didn't want to deal with all that headache. They had reached out to a Cash for Clunkers organization that offered to give them scrap price for the vehicle and pick it up with no questions asked. Now he knew I was into cars and he happened to bump into me in the office, so he said if I was willing to do the same thing, pick it up, no questions asked, and give them the same amount of money as the Cash for Clunkers organization, I could have it. If you've been building project cars for a while, you know these deals pop up from time to time, and they are incredibly rare, and I'm not going to say that this is practical for you to assume you're going to wind up with this kind of deal if you're looking for a project car. But to prove the naysayers wrong, saying there's no way that I only spent $500 on this Jeep, and to give hope to those that may be looking for an affordable project car, I'd love to hear your stories down below in the comments on some good deal you may have gotten on a project car. So after purchasing this Jeep sight unseen, I was actually able to drive it home, and it came with brand new wheels and tires, which I was not expecting. It also only had less than 115,000 miles on the clock, which was a huge surprise to me. The mileage here is important to note as it may indicate the type of repairs and how many you're going to have to make. I'm going to go through all the mechanical repairs I had to do before I started doing the cosmetic stuff, so you have a ballpark estimate on what a project car may cost you, especially if it's been sitting for a while like this Jeep had. Now the first mechanical repair we did was the AC unit, which we knew about. After doing the usual troubleshooting, I figured out the AC clutch may be the problem, and after removing it, it fell apart into two pieces in my hand. Now since I wasn't sure if the clutch was the only problem with this air conditioning unit, I didn't want to buy a new one, so I pulled a used one from the junkyard, which brings me to the first important part of this video, which is how to affordably source parts. For those of you who may not know, there are companies out there called some sort of pick and pull or you pull and you pay that will allow you to go to a yard full of old cars and pull whatever parts you need. They do not price differently based on rarity or type of car. It's all generic and it's just at the front desk. You'll pay for whatever part you pulled. See here in this example, the fender at the pick and pull is $42. And if I look on eBay, including shipping, the cheapest I can get is $200. So you'll save a significant amount of money pulling your own part. This is how I sourced all the used parts on this Jeep, and I highly recommend you find one near you. In this case, I can actually pull up pictures of the Jeep on the yard and make sure it has the parts I'm looking for before I even go out there. Now keep in mind these pictures are from when the Jeep first hits the yard, so there may be fewer parts available by the time you get there. Fortunately, after pulling the used clutch from the yard, we ended up having a working AC for a little less than $23. Now, when I picked this Jeep up, it already had a 3-inch lift and oversized tires on it, which is actually an amazing deal because I didn't have to do it myself. What I didn't know is that Jeep XJ transmissions are typically sized for the Jeep when it comes from the factory, so they're very likely to overheat if there's no aftermarket cooler installed, which I found out the hard way. So with that foreshadowing, after driving the Jeep for a little bit after fixing the AC, I did notice the transmission start to get a little laggy when it was switching gears, and overdrive sometimes would fall out, so I knew something bad was going on. When I checked the fluid, it smelled burnt, it was black, common signs of a burnt clutch. And shortly after that, I put in like a clutch saver liquid formula thing just as a last ditch effort. And about a week after that, it started working. I was actually shocked. I couldn't believe that it was functioning the way it should after a simple transmission fluid change and some magic stuff from the auto parts store. And then the front seal blew out, so I knew I had to replace the entire transmission. Now I did take it to a local transmission shop. I was quoted about $2,000 or $3,000 to do a full replacement with a rebuilt transmission, which was way more than I was willing to spend on a Jeep that I have a little over $500 in. so I decided I was going to try to tackle it myself. Now, I said earlier in this video that a pick and pull is a great place to get used parts, and that's true, but I do not believe you should be pulling mechanical parts. That's my own belief. Some people do it because it's much more of a gamble. You don't know why that vehicle is on the yard, if the engine quit working, or if the transmission went out, or if it was flooded and now you've got flood water in all your mechanical components. So I really only use that for cosmetic replacements. I don't typically go there for true drivetrain replacements. Instead, I choose to get most of my stuff from Facebook Marketplace. You have a single person that you can kind of hold somewhat accountable. It's not great, but better than a random junkyard vehicle. And you can also typically see the vehicle it comes out of. So you can tell, oh, this was clearly in an accident. The drivetrain's probably fine. It's just, it probably has a bent frame and it's no good. So I always recommend pulling any major drivetrain components from Facebook Marketplace, like I did here where I only spent $300, and it was from a wrecked Jeep, so I knew the condition of the Jeep before it was pulled. Now that doesn't take away the fact that it's still somewhat of a gamble and you could be doing regretted work, but I dropped the pan to make sure there wasn't any metal shavings and it looked really good before I installed it. Now to keep the same issue from happening again, I just bought a generic transmission oil cooler from Amazon, which you can find the links down below. Now after driving the Jeep for a while, it ended up shifting great. The transmission had no issues, but just like fate would have it, the brakes started to lock up as well, which is pretty common for older age vehicles, especially that have been sitting. So we did a full brake swap in the front, including hoses, calipers, rotors, and pads, just to be safe. Now after this happened, I decided I wanted a little bit more monitoring going on, so I got this tire pressure monitor that gives me temperature and pressure for each tire, so I can better determine if my vehicle is pulling one way because of a low tire or a locked caliper if the temperature increases. It also has a voltmeter to compare against the vehicles to make sure that my alternator is functioning. Now for context, again, if you're planning on doing a project vehicle, just so you have a frame of reference, the transmission job was probably 2 days because it was my first one. I didn't really know what I was doing. The AC job was probably about 2 days as well between troubleshooting and getting parts. And then last but not least, doing the brake job was about half a day, pretty standard work. Now this excludes all the time it took me to go get the transmission and research where to find one and all that other stuff. So keep that in mind. These are all just like if I worked on it consecutively day by day, didn't have to run around and get extra parts, that's probably about the time it would take. Now that we have a running and driving Jeep, it's time to get into the fun cosmetic stuff that I'm sure everybody wants to know about. The first thing I did was upgrade to LED headlights. I believe one of the ones that I got when I first got the Jeep was already burnt out, so I knew I had to replace, so I decided to upgrade to a more reliable and visible headlight. And before the keyboard warriors come out and tell me how terrible aftermarket LED headlights are, they're not terrible. LED headlights are perfectly safe. If they weren't, they wouldn't be on every brand new vehicle coming from the factory. To avoid endangering the public and pissing people off, we need to A, make sure that we are getting DOT SAE certified headlights to make sure that they are road compliant, and B, adjust them when you put them in. This is the biggest factor that I think is frustrating everybody, is people will just put in new headlights thinking they don't need to adjust anything, and they blind other drivers in the process. Please do that so I don't have to hear about it in my comment section. Now to start cleaning up the interior, the first thing we did was get some armrests to replace the broken ones on the two front doors. And to actually clean up the door panels, I just used a magic eraser, and a lot of the dirt came right off and we had brand new looking door panels. Now I've also gotten a lot of controversial opinions on this next part, which is the Apple CarPlay radio that I put in. Now the radio I chose works really well and it fits very nicely into the dash, and I didn't have to modify the dash and cut it up to get it to fit. It's a simple single DIN radio, and I could still reach all of the AC controls underneath the screen. Now I understand if this ruins the vintage vibe of the Jeep for you. For me it does too, kind of, but I do drive this Jeep for work a lot. I go to a lot of different addresses, and I wanted my maps easy to see for a safety reason. So for me, this makes it more functional. Please forgive me. I think functionality is an important thing to keep when doing a custom build like this. Now another over-the-top feature that I like personally is hands-free controls while driving, so I can flip my music and not have to be distracted. I got this wireless controller that connects Bluetooth to my phone, and there's a magnetic mount that mounts on the back of my steering wheel so I can flip through my songs while driving. Next, I put in USB charging ports to give it more of a modern feel and hide the dangling cords so they wouldn't be obnoxious. Also, while replacing the radio, I noticed that the dash had some cracks in it, and it actually broke off into a separate piece when removing it. That means it's back to the junkyard to find a replacement, which we found a wood grain from a higher trim XJ, and at the same time decided to upgrade the dash cluster since I had the world's largest gas gauge instead of actually usable gauges. Now these are for the most part plug and play for the same year Jeep, however you will need to change the oil sending unit. Next, the headliner was removed before I even got the Jeep, which means I went to the junkyard to pull a headliner panel, which cost me less than $23. Before putting in the panel, I had to cover up the random holes that came with the higher trim Jeep since mine didn't have those options. And I decided to use spray foam as well as some fabric with some spray adhesive to cover those holes before applying the new fabric. I bought the new headliner material on eBay Motors because I thought it would be a better match. In hindsight, I probably would have just used some generic fabric that I could get anywhere for a lot cheaper of a price. Installing the headliner was a little bit unique of a challenge just because I didn't take it out or the trim around it that held it together. So it was a little bit of a puzzle putting it back together, but it did a significant job holding out the heat and holding in the AC once I got it installed. Now when I replaced the headliner, I went ahead and put a new dome light in that had individual reading light controls. This came from a higher trim Jeep that had more options. So just another idea while you're in the junkyard to keep an eye out for little things like this that may give you some more options. Next, my Jeep had some cut up carpet and stains in there from where I think the previous owner had been tracking a leak. So I went to the local carpet store that had leftover rolls from previous houses and bought the one that looked the closest to mine, which only cost me $50 out the door, and I cut it up and fit it in there. It did take some time to put the relief cuts in correctly to get it to match the floorboard, but when I was all said and done, you really couldn't tell that it was house carpet other than the fact it was probably a little bit more shaggy than what you would see in most cars, which can lead to some more dirt being trapped if you're not careful, but if you put a mat over it, it's fine. Next, I decided I wanted to try something a little bit unique. I wasn't sure if I was going to like these. I thought they might look pretty tacky, and I'm sure to some people they do, but to me they were kind of fun and just something when someone got in they weren't expecting to see in the Jeep. Now, these were actually surprisingly easy to clean. I thought they were going to be real messy really fast, but they were actually surprisingly waterproof and didn't hold a lot of dirt, and I really ended up liking them, and they didn't look as tacky as I thought. Now, if you're looking to buy these for an older XJ, they only sell them for the 2000 years and up, so you will have to modify them a little bit like I did with some scissors to get them to fit correctly. Next, I wanted something to protect the original seats since they were in pretty good shape, so I bought these seat covers on Amazon that also happened to match the diamond stitching on the floor mats that I bought. Now, these weren't a great fit, but for the price, I really couldn't beat them. Next, I had ridden in some newer cars that had interior lights at night, so if you dropped something in the footwells, you could find whatever you dropped, so I decided I kind of wanted that feature in this vehicle as well. I bought these footwell lights on Amazon for relatively cheap and just ran all the cords up and around the dash and through the interior panels to hide all the wires. Now you can wire these in directly like I did or simply plug them into a cigarette lighter or USB port depending on which model you get from Amazon, but I didn't want the cords showing so I decided to wire directly. And you can see in this video how they turned out. Now, please don't roast me, I had them turned up pretty high, so they do look pretty obnoxious, but when actually driving, I kept them on the lowest setting, and they were really casual looking and honestly looked pretty nice. Now, at the same time, I also swapped all of the gauge cluster lighting to LED as well to make the gauges easier to see, and also kind of match more of the lighting that I had put in. Now that we have the inside all done, it's time to move the outside where we have some collision damage from a parking lot incident with a Nissan, and you'll never guess who won that battle. Now you already know it's back to the junkyard to get the parts we need, and I decided to go with the newer Jeep front end. I personally think it looks a little bit better, but I know a lot of people like the nostalgic of the older front ends. Now I'll probably be doing a video on how to do this swap since the wiring harnesses are different. It took me a while to figure out exactly which wire went where and how to incorporate the old style wiring harness in with the new using my trusty old Haynes manual. Now once we got all the new front end parts aligned and put on there, we checked all of the gap spacing to try to get it as close as possible before applying our new coat of paint. I also managed to find at the junkyard a new cowl piece that hadn't been cracked like mine, so I went ahead and replaced that at the same time. Now while doing all this work, I decided to go through and fix all of the minor door dings and hail damage and things like that that were easy to fix so I could have a better paint job at the end. Along the way, I also decided the driver's side window looked pretty rough with the scratches that were in it, so you already know we went to the junkyard, pulled a better looking window off of another Jeep and decided to put that in as well to help clean that up. The existing tint was also mismatched on one side, and I decided that I wanted the entire vehicle tinted to both give it a better look and it really helped the AC function a lot better, keeping that heat out, so I highly recommend doing this upgrade as well. Now the price shown here will vary drastically depending on the quality of tint you get. I got 3M lifetime warranty just so I wouldn't have to worry about it in the future, so keep that in mind based on what you pick. Now next we're going to talk about the pretty controversial part of this, which was the roll-on paint job I did using Rust-Oleum for less than $100. But here are the after shots from the paint job that I did. There was no clear coat, no wet sanding or buffing afterwards. How you see it is how it came off the roller with no correction afterwards. After doing this, I firmly believe that a well-done roll-on job will always beat a poorly done spray job. Now I got a lot of flack on this. Paint is paint. It doesn't matter how it gets to the surface as long as you stay within the recoat window and follow the material data sheet on how to mix it. Now a lot of people think you can only spray on paint on a car and they won't hear anything different. And the main reason that that's the case is because it's way faster to do a spray job and you do get a better surface finish if you know what you're doing. If it's your first time using a spray gun, you're not going to get a show quality finish. It takes practice. You have to know the settings of the gun. You have to know air pressure. You have to know the atomization of the gun, how close to be. All of that takes time and practice. For a roll-on paint job, most people understand how to use a roller. It's a lot easier to see if you're going on wet or dry, and it's just a much more simple process. So I highly recommend considering it. There's a lot more content on my page to check out. I'm not going to dive into the entire process here on this video, but again, I used a roller. It was very affordable, and I highly recommend it, especially if you can't risk overspray on your project. Now, after doing the white on the outside, I decided I want black on the roof to give it a really sporty look, like a lot of new cars off the lot have. Now, the black did not get that hot in Texas. Everyone thinks that it was a horrible idea. It's not that much darker than the dark green that was already there, and with the headliner in there, it really insulated it and kept a lot of that heat out. After getting the paint on there, I was really excited to put it back together, and I took a lot of inspiration from the new AT4s and Trail Bosses that Chevy's putting out, and I really wanted a cool bumper to go with it. And I looked for a long time to find an affordable option, and I couldn't really find what I wanted until I had an idea to make something work that was already on the market. So I found this bumper on eBay, and I noticed this extra piece. After doing some research, I noticed that if I got rid of it, I actually got the clean look that I was looking for, which gave me a lot of confidence that this would work once it was on the Jeep. So after getting it in my possession, I ended up leaving that bullnose piece off that I thought looked pretty rough for a daily driver, and I spray painted the tow hooks red, just to give it that eye-popping look like the AT4s have. Now, for those of you thinking this is a cheap bumper, it's not going to hold up very well, let me just say I know from experience that this bumper will hold up. However, I did have to buy a second one later on, and I did not include that in the cost of this project just because that was an unrelated incident to the actual project itself. The bumper came with its own set of fog lights, plus I wanted to put a light bar on potentially for night camping as well as some other exterior lights. So I got this cool three-way switch on Amazon to wire those lights in seamlessly into my dash. Now I did have kind of a spacer panel on the bottom left side of my dash where nothing was, and I was able to fit these in almost perfectly and run all my wiring to those. Now you'll probably notice the other items that I did, such as these smoked turn signals that I got on eBay, as well as the winch that I got on sale at Harbor Freight. You just have to keep your eyes out for when those go on sale. You'll probably also notice the decals that I put on the hood. Those I got from Amazon. They were super easy to put on with just a little bit of water and getting them centered correctly. You'll also notice that I put the rain guards on to give it more of a sporty look as well. Those ended up getting too hot in the sun and ended up melting later on. So I don't know if I necessarily recommend those unless if you live in a cooler climate. Mine were missing the rear ones when I got them, which is why you only see them on the front doors. And I ended up getting them for free from Amazon, and they said not to return them, so that was actually a pretty good deal. Last but not least is the time it took to complete this project. It took me 8 months total to go from the way you saw it at the beginning of this video to the end, start to finish. Now I will say that was a lot of long weekends and a lot of 5-10 minute days during the week, just whatever I could squeeze in after work. My best advice to you would be to just touch it every day. It'll keep you motivated and keep you working along so you don't lose motivation on your project. That's it for this build. If you saw anything in the background you have questions about, please feel free to call it out. Happy to explain in more detail. I will be launching more videos of each part of this build in more detail so you can do it yourself. So if there's anything you saw that was interesting, please go ahead and call it out in the comments and I'll make that a priority in future videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on my next build.